The night begins quietly, too quietly. Picture a vast, snow-covered landscape. The kind of silence that makes you feel like you've stepped outside of time itself. A bitter wind slices through the air, carrying nothing but emptiness. And yet, in that emptiness, something once walked. The case of the vanishing footsteps is one of the most baffling and unsettling mysteries ever recorded. It began in the winter of 1947, when a team of hikers set out into the Ural Mountains of Russia. Experienced, confident, and equipped, they vanished into the white expanse. Days later, rescuers stumbled upon a sight that would ignite decades of fear and speculation. There in the snow, a trail of footsteps, perfectly preserved, leading away from the hikers' abandoned camp. But here's the detail that chilled even hardened investigators. The tracks revealed that the hikers had left their tents barefoot, half-dressed, as though fleeing from something in sheer terror. Their camp was intact, supplies untouched, no signs of struggle, no intruders, just frantic, naked footprints stretching into the frozen wilderness. The rescuers followed them. Step after step, the trail continued, until it simply stopped. No collapse into the snow, no turn, no blood, nothing. The footprints just ended. It was as though the hikers had been plucked from existence mid-stride. The search continued, combing the woods, valleys, and frozen rivers. Days later, bodies began to surface. Some of the hikers were found miles from the camp, half buried in snow. But what was most disturbing wasn't their location, it was their condition. One body had a fractured skull, shattered with a force greater than any human hand. Another had her ribs crushed inward, as though struck by something immense, yet no external wounds marked her skin. One woman was missing her tongue entirely, torn from her mouth. Investigators were left reeling. What could cause such violent injuries, without leaving so much as a mark on the surface of their bodies? Whispers of the supernatural began to spread. Some claimed the hikers had witnessed something unnatural in the mountains, something that chased them from their tents in horror. Others suggested military experiments, weapons tests that ripped through the night. And then there were the stranger theories still: aliens, portals, curses. The official report called it an unknown compelling force. But anyone who has seen the photographs of their camp, their bodies, knows the truth. These hikers saw something that should not exist. For decades, the vanishing footsteps have haunted investigators, journalists, and skeptics alike. Because the most terrifying part isn't just the mystery of how they died. It's the footsteps themselves. That long, lonely trail in the snow, cut off mid-stride, as though they were walking into the arms of something invisible. And when you imagine yourself in their place, alone in the mountains, barefoot in the snow, hearing something behind you that leaves no tracks of its own, you begin to understand why this case has never left the public's imagination. But the vanishing footsteps were only the beginning. Because history is littered with unsolved cases, each darker and stranger than the last. And as we descend into them one by one, remember, the unknown has teeth, and it waits where you least expect it. Imagine walking into a town where life has simply stopped. No screams, no signs of struggle, just silence. This is what investigators found in 1930 when they arrived at the small Inuit settlement of Angikuni Lake in the Canadian wilderness. Hunters had reported strange activity, lights in the sky, the flicker of something massive moving across the horizon. But when authorities arrived, they discovered something far more unsettling. The village, once home to dozens of families, was utterly deserted. Huts still stood, doors wide open, fires burned down to ash. Half-eaten meals sat frozen on tables. Furs hung in doorways as though someone had stepped out only moments before. But there were no footsteps in the snow, no sled tracks, no signs of migration. The people were simply gone. What chilled investigators most was the dogs. A pack of sled dogs, essential for survival in the Arctic, was found tied up outside. Starved, frozen. Their owners had left them behind, something no Inuit would ever do. And in the snow, rifles were discovered leaning against huts. Food supplies untouched, clothes still inside. It was as though the villagers had walked out of their lives in the middle of an ordinary day, never to return. But the graveyard told another story. When investigators visited the burial grounds, they found the graves had been disturbed. Not by animals, not by looters. The earth had been dug up with precision. Caskets stood open, and the bodies inside were missing. The official records buried the story in obscurity. Skeptics dismissed it as myth, but those who studied it closely recognized something darker. How could dozens of people, men, women, children, vanish without leaving a single trace? Where could they go without transport, food, or shelter in the deadly cold? And then there were the lights. Eyewitnesses reported glowing orbs drifting over the lake that same night. Some claimed they weren't lights at all, but massive shapes blotting out the stars. Whether you believe in alien abduction, supernatural forces, or something far more human, the Silent Village remains a case that defies explanation. Imagine being one of the last survivors, watching your family step into the night, drawn by something unseen. Imagine the silence that followed, an entire world gone quiet in an instant. The fear lies not in what was found, but in what wasn't. No bodies, no tracks, no answers, just a hollow village echoing with the memory of life. And it wouldn't be the last time people vanished without explanation. Because sometimes, it isn't a whole village that disappears, but the people who enter a single building, never to walk back out. Deep within the forests of Appalachia, there is a story locals whisper only after dark. They call it the cabin that waited, a case so strange, it has resisted explanation for nearly a century. It begins in the autumn of 1928, when a logging crew working in the West Virginia mountains stumbled upon an isolated cabin. Its wooden frame was weathered, its roof sagging, its windows dark. But what disturbed them wasn't the cabin itself, it was the feeling. The forest was silent. Not a single bird, not a single insect, not even the wind dared stir when they approached. One of the loggers would later say, "It felt like the whole mountain was holding its breath." They pushed open the door. Inside, the cabin was immaculate. Dusty, yes, but everything neatly arranged. A cast-iron stove in the corner, a table set for four, and a rocking chair still swaying as though someone had just risen from it. On the table sat a journal, its last entry dated more than 50 years earlier. It read simply, "It's still outside. Watching. Waiting." The loggers left the cabin unsettled but intrigued. That night, one of them didn't return to camp. His boots and axe were found just outside the cabin door. No blood, no struggle, just absence. Over the next several weeks, curiosity got the better of other travelers. Hunters, trappers, hikers, those who entered the cabin alone rarely returned. And those who did told stories that left listeners pale. One man claimed he had entered at dusk, only to emerge hours later into broad daylight. Except the hours had been 3 full days. Another swore he'd seen someone sitting in the rocking chair, an old woman with a hollow face. Though when he struck a lantern, the chair was empty. Perhaps the most unsettling tale comes from a sheriff's deputy who investigated the disappearances in 1932. He recorded that the cabin's windows reflected not the forest outside, but something else entirely, a shifting, endless darkness. He reported voices in the rafters, whispering his name, begging him to stay. He never filed a second report. He, too, vanished. Eventually, authorities ordered the cabin burned to the ground. The loggers complied, dousing it in kerosene and watching the flames consume it. For a moment, relief spread. But when they returned weeks later, the cabin stood there once again, untouched, waiting. By the 1950s, the site was abandoned altogether. Locals warn hikers to avoid the area, though a handful of paranormal investigators have tried to locate the cabin since. Some return with photographs, grainy, unsettling images of a structure that doesn't appear on any map. Others never come back at all. And so it waits, deep in the woods. A cabin out of time, drawing the curious, the reckless, and the doomed into its doorframe. What lies inside? Nobody knows. Some say it's a portal. Others believe it's cursed ground, marked by an older, darker history than any human settlement. But the truth is far more terrifying. It's still there, still waiting. And if you ever wander too far into the Appalachian woods, you may hear the faint creak of a rocking chair in the distance, beckoning you closer. But if you step inside, you may never step out again. In 1974, a family in Massachusetts purchased an old colonial home, eager to restore its faded beauty. The structure dated back to the late 1700s, its beams heavy with history, its wooden floors worn thin by centuries of footsteps. At first, the house seemed charming. But soon, the the family began to hear things. It started small. At night, when the children were in bed and the house was quiet, faint scratching noises echoed from beneath the floorboards. Not the sound of mice or settling wood. These were deliberate, rhythmic, like someone tapping slowly with their fingernails. The parents dismissed it at first, until the children began to complain. They said voices whispered through the cracks in their bedroom floors. Low, urgent whispers, repeating their names. One night, the mother awoke to the sound of her youngest son crying. When she rushed to his room, she found him standing in the corner, eyes wide, pointing at the ground. He said, "They're under us. They're asking me to let them out." Terrified, the family began to investigate the house's history. What they uncovered was more chilling than anything they expected. The home had once belonged to a man named Elias Porter, a reclusive figure rumored to dabble in dark practices. Neighbors had long whispered about screams in the night, about strange deliveries, crates brought in, but never taken out. When Porter died in 1812, no one claimed the house. It simply sat, passed from one unlucky owner to the next. Determined to uncover the source of the noises, the father pried up the floorboards in the cellar. Beneath, he found a narrow crawl space, filled with dirt, bones, and fragments of clothing. Human bones. Dozens of them. Authorities were called, but no full investigation ever concluded. The remains were deemed historical, the deaths untraceable. The family was advised to seal the space and move on. But the whispers did not stop. If anything, they grew stronger. The children refused to sleep in their rooms, claiming pale hands reached up through the cracks at night. The mother reported hearing breathing beneath her bed. The final straw came one evening when the family returned home to find every piece of furniture in the house stacked neatly in the center of the living room. On top of the pile lay a single floorboard, ripped from the ground, with the words carved deep into its surface. "We are still here." The family fled that night, never to return. The house was sold, then sold again, each new owner lasting only a short time before leaving in terror. Today, it sits abandoned, windows boarded, floors silent. But locals say if you walk past after dark, you can still hear the scratching, the whispers, the faint sound of voices calling up from beneath the floorboards, waiting for someone, anyone, to finally set them free. And on the morning of June 14, 1911, passengers boarded the Zanetti Company's luxury train in Rome, Italy. It was a gleaming black locomotive with 3 cars, advertised as the height of elegance. The passengers, wealthy businessmen, their wives, and a handful of prominent figures, settled into plush seats, eager for the scenic journey across the Italian countryside. The train departed on schedule. Witnesses watched it pull out of the station, wheels hissing, smoke trailing into the summer sky. But what followed became one of the strangest transportation mysteries in history. The Zanetti train never arrived at its destination. When hours passed without word, authorities began a frantic search. The tracks were inspected mile by mile, stations combed, tunnels checked. And yet, there was no sign of the locomotive. No wreckage. No bodies. No evidence a train had ever passed. The only clue came from a small village near a mountain pass. 2 men reported seeing the train enter a tunnel that afternoon. They described its whistle, the smoke, the gleam of its steel. But according to railway records, the train never emerged from the other side. Rescue teams searched the tunnel repeatedly. They found nothing. No debris. No evidence of a cave-in. The tracks were clear and uninterrupted. It was as though the train had simply been swallowed by the earth. Dozens of theories emerged. Some suggested a cover-up, perhaps a military experiment gone wrong, the train requisitioned and erased from record. Others whispered of portals, of time itself opening in that dark tunnel. Still others pointed to a chilling detail. In the weeks that followed, reports surfaced from far away. A monastery in Madra, Yugoslavia, claimed 2 men had stumbled onto their grounds in a daze, wearing 19th-century clothing. They swore they had been aboard the Zanetti train. Their accounts were incoherent, filled with descriptions of thick fog and strange, echoing sounds outside the windows before they leapt from the moving car in terror. If true, that would mean the train, and its remaining passengers, were still out there, somewhere, locked in a liminal place beyond understanding. Even stranger are later claims. In the 1950s, a group of Mexican railway workers reported seeing a black locomotive barreling down abandoned tracks outside Guadalajara. It matched the description of the Zanetti train exactly, yet when they approached, it vanished into thin air. Could a train, with its passengers, slip between worlds? Could those men and women still be trapped inside, staring endlessly out of fogged windows, waiting for a destination that never comes? The disappearing train has become more legend than case, yet its records remain. A manifest of passengers who never came home. A company that never recovered its prized locomotive. A tunnel where silence hangs heavier than anywhere else in Italy. Some locals say that if you enter that tunnel at night, you can still hear it. The faint rumble of wheels on iron. The echo of a whistle blowing in the dark. A ghost train, forever traveling between stations, forever lost. There is a stretch of forest in Eastern Europe where the trees grow twisted, their branches bending unnaturally toward a single clearing. Locals refuse to enter after sundown, warning travelers of a strange object hidden deep within, a mirror that does not belong to this world. The earliest account dates back to the late 1800s, when a farmer's son vanished while tending livestock near the forest edge. 3 days later, he stumbled back into town, aged, wild-eyed, and unable to speak. His hair had turned completely white. When he finally uttered words again, they were only these: "Don't look at the glass." He died the following week. By the early 20th century, hunters and woodcutters began reporting something bizarre in the clearing: a tall, freestanding mirror framed in blackened wood, its surface smooth as still water. Nobody knew how it got there. And yet, whenever anyone tried to move it, it would reappear the next morning in the same exact place. The legends surrounding it grew darker. Those who gazed into the mirror too long claimed their reflection did not move in sync. Instead, it lagged, smiling when they did not, staring when they looked away. Some swore they saw figures standing just behind their reflections. Others said the glass showed futures too horrifying to describe. The most infamous case occurred in 1936, when a group of students from a nearby university dared each other to spend the night in the clearing. Only one survived. His companions were found dead the next morning, their bodies contorted, faces twisted in silent screams. The survivor was discovered miles away, wandering the road barefoot. He was incoherent, repeating a single phrase in Latin. Speculum non reddit, sed absorbit. The translation? The mirror does not reflect, it absorbs. Authorities dismissed it as hysteria. The deaths ruled accidental poisoning from foraged berries. But locals knew better. To this day, they warn, do not seek the mirror. Do not stare into it. For what looks back is not you. Some paranormal researchers claim the mirror is a gateway, a boundary between worlds. They say the twisted trees are proof, bending toward the object like iron filings toward a magnet. Others argue it's an ancient ritual artifact, left behind by a sect that vanished centuries ago. But the truth may be far worse. Because those who disappear in those woods are said to sometimes return, not as themselves, but as something slightly wrong. Their mannerisms a little off, their laughter a beat too late, their shadows not quite aligned with their bodies. If you ever find yourself in a forest where the trees lean unnaturally toward a clearing, remember this: some reflections aren't meant to be seen. And some mirrors aren't meant to return what stands before them. The glass in the woods waits patiently, as it has for centuries, waiting for eyes to meet its surface, waiting for someone to look too long. And once it has you, it never lets go. In the late 1950s, the rise of radio brought music, news, and connection into millions of homes. But along with the familiar comfort of stations and programs came something far stranger, something that still unsettles listeners to this day. It began with shortwave operators. Amateur radio enthusiasts across Europe reported bursts of unexplained transmissions cutting through their broadcasts. At first, it was nothing more than distorted static, a crackling hiss that rose and fell like breathing. But soon, the static gave way to something worse: voices. They weren't clear, at least not at first. Fragments of sentences whispered in monotone, syllables stretched unnaturally long. Then came the repetition. Operators claimed the voices repeated their names, sometimes slowly, sometimes in a rapid, desperate rhythm, as though begging for a response. One chilling incident was logged in 1962. An operator in Sweden recorded hours of static that suddenly broke into a child's voice, singing an old lullaby. But when he played it back, the voice wasn't in Swedish. It was in a language he couldn't identify, harsh, guttural, and wrong. Linguists later confirmed it resembled no known human tongue, and the phenomenon didn't stay confined to hobbyists. Entire families reported strange transmissions bleeding into their radios at night. Some swore they heard knocking sounds, 3 slow knocks, followed by silence. Others described conversations in which multiple voices spoke in overlapping tones, too distorted to make sense of. The most disturbing accounts, however, came from those who claimed the voices responded. A housewife in Ohio swore that when she muttered, "Who is this?" into the static one lonely night, the voice answered back with her full name, her address, and the exact date of her death. Weeks later, she vanished without a trace. By the 1970s, researchers coined the phenomenon EVP, electronic voice phenomena. Some treated it as a curiosity, a possible bridge to the spirit world. Others believed it was something far more sinister, entities using technology to bleed into our reality. But the recordings only grew stranger. In 1985, a British paranormal investigator captured hours of static that shifted without warning into crystal clarity. A voice whispered, "We see you through the wires." Skeptics called it interference, misheard broadcasts, or hoaxes. But those who've listened closely know better. Because the voices don't just speak. They warn, they beg, they threaten, and in some rare cases, they imitate. Families reported hearing loved ones' voices coming through the radio while that very person sat beside them. Perfect imitations, down to inflection and tone. Yet the words spoken were wrong, phrases no family member would ever utter. To this day, late-night radio operators sometimes report it. A sudden burst of static, a strange whisper cutting across the frequency. Some even keep the recordings locked away, refusing to share them, because they say the voices don't just live in the static. They follow you once you've heard them. In 1999, a young couple in Prague purchased an old apartment building with the intention of restoring it. The structure dated back to the 1800s, its walls thick, its corridors long and narrow. They hired contractors to renovate, tearing down plaster, replacing rotted wood, and updating the layout. But one day, workers made a discovery that froze them in their tracks. Behind a false wall, sealed tight with bricks, they found a hidden door. Its frame was older than the rest of the building, its wood blackened with age. No keyhole, just a handle, cold to the touch. When the door was forced open, the workers found themselves staring into a small, windowless room. The air was suffocating, stale with centuries of silence. The walls were covered in scratches, thousands of them. Deep grooves gouged into the plaster by fingernails. In the center of the room sat a single chair. Shackles were bolted into the floor around it. And etched into the wall, just above the chair, were the words, "Do not let it out." The couple contacted the city's archives, desperate for answers. What they learned was deeply unsettling. The building had once been owned by a nobleman in the early 1800s. Records described him as wealthy, eccentric, and increasingly paranoid in his later years. Neighbors whispered of strange noises echoing from his home, moaning, screaming, the sound of furniture being hurled across rooms. Servants came and went, but none stayed long. Then, one winter, he vanished completely. No body was ever found. Some historians believe the room had been built to contain him, or something he brought into the house. The couple, shaken but curious, decided to keep the room sealed. For months, nothing happened. But soon, the noises began. At night, they heard the unmistakable sound of scratching coming from the hidden door. Slow, deliberate, clawing scratches, as though something inside was trying to dig its way out. Sometimes it was accompanied by faint knocks. 3 times, always 3. One evening, the wife awoke to find the bedroom door ajar. Her husband swore he'd locked it before bed. On the floor between their room and the hidden chamber, she found a trail of faint scratches, like marks dragged by something crawling. Contractors refused to work in the building. Friends who visited complained of nausea, a feeling watched. And one morning, the couple discovered the hidden door had opened on its own. The chair inside was empty. No explanation was ever found. The couple sold the building at a loss and fled the city. To this day, locals whisper about the cursed apartment. Tenants rarely stay longer than a few months. Those who do report the same sounds: scratching, knocking, whispers through the walls. The room still exists, locked and ignored, hidden deep within the building's bones. But the warning etched into its wall remains as chilling as ever. Do not let it out. In 1987, a small-town radio station in rural Kentucky received a package with no return address. Inside was a single cassette tape labeled only with the words, "Play ME." At first, the staff assumed it was a prank. But when the tape was played, what spilled from the speakers left them shaken. The recording began with faint static, followed by the sound of heavy breathing. Then, a man's voice whispered, "If you are hearing this, it's already too late." What followed was 23 minutes of chaos. Footsteps pounding across floors, doors slamming, a child screaming in the background, a woman begging, "Please, please, don't let it in." Midway through the tape, a strange sound emerged, low, guttural, like a growl but metallic, as though grinding through static itself. The voices grew frantic, overlapping in terror. One man shouted scripture. Another shrieked incoherently. Then came the sound of wood splintering, glass breaking, and a final, ear-piercing wail. The last thing recorded was a whisper so faint it nearly blended into the static. Enhanced later by audio specialists, the words became clear. "We are inside now." The station turned the tape over to authorities, who began an investigation. They traced the cassette's materials to a local store, but found no receipts, no evidence of who had purchased it. They visited the return address written faintly in pencil on the inner flap of the cassette case. But when they arrived, they found only the burned-out ruins of a farmhouse. Neighbors told of a family who once lived there, a husband, wife, and 2 children. They'd been gone for months, vanished in the night without explanation. Some recalled hearing screams across the fields. Others claimed to have seen lights flickering in the windows before the fire consumed everything. But no bodies were ever found. The cassette tape remains one of the most disturbing unsolved artifacts in paranormal history. Audio engineers who studied it argued it was too authentic to be staged. The overlapping voices, the chaotic environment, it all carried a realism no prankster could easily replicate. And then there was the sound. The metallic growl. The static that seemed to pulse with something alive. Experts could not identify it, nor replicate it with any known machine. The tape now sits locked in a vault, sealed by local authorities who refuse to speak of it. Copies circulate among collectors, whispered about in underground forums. Some who've listened claim they hear more than voices, that faint whispers emerge beneath the screams, speaking directly to the listener. Warnings, threats, promises. And many who've listened too long report the same terrifying phenomenon. Their radios, televisions, even their phones begin to pick up fragments of the recording. Static where there should be silence. Whispers where there should be none. It is said that the tape isn't just a record of what happened in that house. It is a door, a signal that doesn't end with the recording, but bleeds outward, seeking new ears. And those who hear it never hear silence again. Every unsolved case leaves a trail, footsteps vanishing into snow, voices trapped in static, entire lives erased from history. But among them all, one case ties the threads together, standing as the darkest of them all, the case that never closed. In 2003, a private investigator named Daniel Harker began cataloging unexplained disappearances across Europe and North America. His goal was simple: to search for patterns, connections that law enforcement had overlooked. He expected superstition, dead ends, scattered folklore. Instead, he uncovered something that defied coincidence. Every case, whether it was the vanishing footsteps, the silent village, the cabin that waited, or the last recording, shared the same symbol. Not always obvious, not always whole, but present, carved into wood, scratched into walls, etched into skin. A crude circle, broken at the bottom, with 3 vertical lines inside it. At first, Harker dismissed it as pareidolia, a trick of the mind. But the more he searched, the clearer it became. The symbol wasn't just there, it was central. He traveled to Russia to view artifacts from the Ural Mountains. The symbol appeared carved into one of the hiker's belongings, hidden beneath layers of fabric. In Canada, near Anjikuni Lake, a hunter claimed to have found it drawn in ash across abandoned snow huts. In Prague, inside the room that shouldn't exist. The warning above the shackled chair ended not with a period, but with the same symbol scratched below the words. And then came the tapes. Harker acquired a copy of the last recording through an anonymous source. He played it in his office late one night, headphones pressed tight against his ears. The voices screamed, the static surged, the growl rattled through his bones. But beneath it all, almost imperceptible, was the whisper of a man's voice repeating the same thing over and over. Circle broken, 3 inside. Circle broken, 3 inside. When Harker reported his findings to colleagues, they laughed. Too vague, too coincidental. But within weeks, Harker disappeared. His office was found empty, his research burned. Only one thing remained intact: a single scrap of paper on his desk. On it, the symbol, drawn in dark ink. The file became known simply as Case 0, the case that never closed. Authorities refused to acknowledge it. Historians dismiss it, but whispers persist, that the symbol is not just a mark, it is an invitation. A door. A tether between worlds. Those who look for it find it. Those who find it vanish. And perhaps the most chilling part is this. In the years since Harker's disappearance, reports of the symbol have only increased. Found scrawled in subway tunnels. Scratched into the bark of trees deep in forests. Etched into fogged bathroom mirrors. Always the same crude circle. Always broken at the bottom. Always 3 vertical lines inside. Some believe the cases we've covered tonight are not isolated at all. They are fragments of one vast, unfinished story, and the ending has yet to be written. So if you ever stumble across the symbol, whether on an old wall, a forgotten object, or somewhere far too close to home, remember this: the case isn't closed. It's waiting. And maybe, just maybe, it's waiting for you.